Hello, and welcome to Futuring Is, a podcast that shines a light on thinkers, dreamers, and doers who are reshaping our world through the lens of the future. My name is Suzanne Whitby, and I am a futurer and futures researcher, a facilitator, and a storyteller. I stand for hopeful, sustainable futures, and everything I do supports the co-creation of something better. The thing is that we can't create or avoid what we can't imagine. And that's why I created this podcast. Through conversations with people who are exploring possible futures in their work and play, whether utopian, dystopian, or somewhere in between, I hope to learn new and interesting ways to use the future to act on the possibilities of tomorrow. I'm so glad that you're here. Today I am joined by the endlessly lovely Rosie Cripps. Rosie is a facilitator, trainer and evaluator who works at the intersection of strategy, systems change and community action. She has over 15 years of experience supporting charities, public sector organisations and communities to think creatively about the future, align around shared dreams and co-produce large-scale, whole community-led initiatives. She brings a deep commitment to social justice, agency and collective leadership, often using appreciative inquiry to inspire large networks of people and build momentum. Rosie's work supports communities to map influence across complex systems, build on what's working, and take hopeful, grounded steps towards positive and inspiring futures. Welcome, Rosie. It is absolutely super that you are here with us today. Thank you for coming along to play.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be here. Yeah, really.
I hope it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing about all the stuff that you do. So just so that everybody knows, the reason that I thought you would be a wonderful person to talk to is because I know that you design and lead whole community co-production events. And part of this work is about helping communities articulate and realize possible futures. So I obviously wrote that down so that I didn't forget what I wanted to ask you. Is that correct? Is that what you do? Are futures part of that? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's 100% what I do. Futures are very much part of it. So I generally bring communities together around a shared goal, which is usually an image of people's ideal future. So yeah, that's 100% correct.
Right. When we were preparing for this call, one of the things you spoke about was how you take people into possible futures, and you also mentioned that you take people back into the past. So if I understand correctly, you are anchoring them in memories, and I don't think that all futures necessarily do this. Why do you do this? How do you do this? Tell me a bit more.
Yeah, so I follow a method called appreciative inquiry. And that always begins by thinking about what's working or what has worked. And can one of the principles is that you're thinking about the past because you want to draw confidence from the past before you look to the future. I got a kind of short story which demonstrates that a bit at a really basic level. I was walking to the beach. So I live very near a beach, so we spend a lot of time at the beach. And there was kind of a big group of adults and children all walking to the beach. And on the way, we stopped at this big sand dune where the children were digging big sand holes. And one of the girls jumped on the other girl's sand holes and it collapsed. And she was mortified and got in a really big mood. And her mum kind of said, that's it. That's the day written off now. She'll just have a gradual day. We're just going to have to live with this. And we're kind of okay. And then we all carried on walking to the beach. And as we were walking to the beach, I was walking with her and she didn't want to walk with any of the children. I was trying to be empathetic and like, oh, that sounds really hard that someone jumped on your sand hole and isn't that sad and life's really hard. And she's kind of getting more and more sad. And then I said, is there anything you want to do? And she couldn't think of anything. She couldn't move forward from it at all. And then I started saying, oh, it's really nice we're going to the beach together. Can you tell me about a time in the past, your best day at this beach that you've ever had? And she started telling me about, oh, well, I went there with my friends and my friends' mums were there as well. And we all kind of laid our picnic blankets out And me and my friends, we went up on the cliffs and we made a den, and we spent the whole day making this den. And then we just came down for some food, and then we could go back up, and the cliff was this really exciting place for us all day. And I said, that sounds great. And then she kind of talked us through this all the way down to the beach, and my son was with her as well. As soon as we got down to the beach, we laid our blankets out, and they went straight up onto the cliffs where she had been on her favorite day many years ago, where they'd made this den, and they made this beautiful den, and she got out of her mood. And I think it's kind of like captures how sometimes we can't look to the future without drawing from our happiest times in the past, where we felt we were really thriving and we felt really empowered or strong or whatever it was. So it's really building on the idea we need to take that with us before we can move forward to think about a really hopeful, inspiring future.
Okay, so then if you're thinking about the work that you're doing, where do you start? Do you start in the present? Do you start in the past? Do you dive into the future? Is there a particular order that you do this stuff in?
Yeah. So I guess we define the topic in the present. So I'll work with the client or, a project team or a couple of other community members to think about what's the topic that, we all want to inquire around. And we'll choose a positive topic that's inspiring, and that will be something that's happening right now. So, for example, we did a project recently where the local school and a swimming pool that was attached to it were at risk of closing. And the pool was really important to the community because it was to teach very young children to swim so they weren't at risk at local beaches. So that was kind of the topic, but then we had to turn that into something positive. And then we'll design questions that we will take out to the community. So those questions will always start with, tell me something you love about your area or the pool or your community or something like that. So that will be in the present. Then we'll ask them, tell me about a time in the past where maybe you made a difference or you felt empowered or you were really thriving or whatever it is. So we'll go present, past, and then we'll take people to the future. And I think if we dove in straight into the future, I just don't think people can get to where they need to go. I think it's just too direct a question. Whereas if we're drawing from the past, it makes people's kind of ambitions about the future feel more tangible and viable.
Okay, so present, past, future. So, but what's really interesting is you mentioned this also when we spoke earlier. You mentioned the fact that you keep the focus on the positive, and I think this is really interesting because when I think about some of the futures work that I read about or sometimes that I do, although I'm trying to get people to think about how to co-create hopeful, sustainable futures, I also have to acknowledge that many of the futures that people are imagining and many of the futures that we're told about, right, from climate experts or from sustainability experts or the IPCC, these are quite dark futures, right? There is a lot of doom and gloom. So can you tell me a little bit about the focus on positivity and if there are any drawbacks to that?
Yeah, I think you have to use it in the right context, this approach. But I think with communities, I think the positivity is really helpful because it enables us to identify kind of shared goals. So one of the principles of appreciative inquiry is that the words we use and the stories we tell, they kind of create our futures in the world around us. So therefore, we always want to be asking positive questions and telling positive stories. So if we're kind of telling negative stories all the time, we're kind of creating a negative future and reality around us. So the positivity is about co-creating a future that we all want to, and a present that we all want to be part of. And I guess it's that kind of perspective shift of, I think everyone could look at their own community and pull out all the negatives, and that becomes their community's identity. Like, oh, that area, it's, full of rubbish and there's loads of crime, and that can become the identity of that area and that community. Whereas if you're focusing on the positives, you start to create a collective identity which you feel proud of, and which people really care about, and they become protective of, and therefore they have a bit more buy-in to as well. So you could take the same community and say, actually, people really look after each other here, and isn't it great that we've got this green park in the middle of it, and we're really lucky to have these trees, and every day, you know, my neighbour says hello to me, and we've got this corner shop where they throw a picnic for everyone every year, whatever it is. And it starts to create a positive identity that we want to be part of, and that we kind of want to develop, I guess. And yeah, I guess to your point about, is it always right, or does it always work? I think I've worked a lot with communities or with people who are kind of co-producing. So you might have like a public service, say, maybe someone in public health who's working with parents of children with disabilities, say, and appreciative inquiry is sometimes used in that context to gloss over people's personal experiences, when actually at that time you really need to be listening to one another and empathizing with each other and understanding each other's needs. And I don't think appreciative inquiry would work so well in that context. But when you're in a context where actually you can view either the kind of, you can actually draw on the positives of the situation to motivate and inspire people and bring people together around a collective goal, then it's really useful, especially when in communities you usually have lots of fragmented communities within the community, and you're kind of bringing everyone together around those shared things which they love about the area, and then those shared ideals they have for the future.
I'm really curious about this. For me, there's quite a tension. I have this tendency to become very Pollyanna and quite positive, like, oh, look at all the opportunities, look at all, the chances that we have. And I really have to be very disciplined about, when I'm working with futures, making sure that I'm helping people understand that there isn't a utopian future. And I'm just wondering, when you start from this wonderful point of past positive experiences, how can we bring those positive, can I call them values, into this future that we want to create? Is there a risk of setting expectations that can't necessarily be met? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think, again, like there's this notion that appreciative inquiry kind of glosses over all of these issues, but it doesn't. It's like if you run an appreciative inquiry interview with someone and you ask them about, tell me about a time in the past when XYZ, they'll often tell you about the sad times as well as the good times. And if you ask people, can you tell me about the future? They'll often start with, I absolutely can't stand XYZ in my community. It drives me mad. But I think the thing that it enables us to do, which is really useful, is to then start looking at what a solution might be. So they're helping people be kind of solutions focused at every step of the way, while still articulating all of the challenges that they're facing day to day. And then what that looks like collectively is when we go out and talk to people and say, okay, what's your, we're running this project and we're talking to you today and we're talking to hundreds of other people. What's the first thing that you think we need to do to make this project happen? We'll have something like that. And they'll say, well, you need to go out and talk to everyone. And we'll say, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. They'll say, yeah, but you need to find out what everyone else thinks. It's like, yeah, that's what we're trying to do through this process. Okay, yeah, but you need to know, what does everyone else want? And what they're actually saying is they need to have a collective picture of how they fit into everyone else's views. And what we find with this image of the future, which is really useful, is like as soon as we reveal it, is quite often people will go to the image and check that what they've talked about is in there. And it's a way of showing people that they've really been listened to and heard. And it maps out all the different needs. And sometimes those needs are opposing, but it's saying, this is what we all need, and what can we start to do to get there? And then what we'll do is we don't leave it there. We bring it back into a design phase where we say, well, what are the steps we're going to do collectively to make this happen? and we'll break that down then into mini dreams, like what are the mini dreams and themes around this vision, and then practical steps that we can leave the day with so we know it's going to operationalize. So there isn't really a conversation about this isn't achievable, or this is pie in the sky. It's kind of like, well, this is what we all want to work towards, now we're going to go make it happen. So is that raising expectations? I think it does raise expectations, which is why I believe in it, but it also puts the expectations back into the room and the community that are there. It's like, we're the only people that are going to make this happen, so what are we going to do that? Yeah.
So I love the concept of mini dreams. So the last couple of people that I've spoken to, they've spoken quite a lot about dreaming and imagination. And Sophia Cheng, I'm not sure if you've met her. If you haven't, I will introduce you. But she talks a lot about radical dreaming and this idea of collective dreaming. And obviously she's coming from a very different angle and uses different tools and methods. But it's so interesting hearing how this translates across all sorts of different methods and techniques that are out there. So that's, but I love the mini dreaming. I love that. That's great. So when we're talking about futures and foresight, and if we're coming at it from a bit of an academic point of view, the methods that they have something called backcasting. So you go forward and you create these futures and you have a look at them, and people explore these futures, right? Pre-experience what's there. And then we say, okay, so what did I have to do in the last 4 or 5 years to get to this point? And then you say, what did I have to do in the couple of years before those 4 years to get to that point, so that you can actually kind of create a plan backwards. But you don't do that. You take people back into the present and say, look, we've heard you. This is our collective vision. What do we need to do now in small chunks to make this a possibility or make this real? Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll take people back to what's worked in the past, and then from that we'll have like kind of the ingredients for success. So that might be the ingredients of a strong community, or the ingredients of a community that takes ownership of its future, or something like that. So we'll have ingredients of success, which kind of become our values and principles. Then we have the dream. So we call it the dream, which is the big collective goal, and we'll call that our dream. And then we break it into mini dreams. So we'll pull themes out of this big dream, and then we create mini dreams from that. And then people self-organize. And a really important part of the process is that people are just drawn to whatever they feel passionate about. So we get people to self-organize based on what they most are kind of called to. And yeah, then we'll start pulling out what are the practical steps that these people can do right now to make this happen. Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot of the stuff that you're doing feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, feels like it's involved with agency, right? This idea that actually you have a role to play, and that role might not be in, I don't know, campaigning with the government. Your role might be to do the knitting, to get whatever this first step happens to be. Whatever it is that you can contribute, you have something to contribute to this overall dream. And I think, again, coming from my sort of sustainability background and thinking about climate change, we know lots of people don't want to do anything or feel that they can't contribute, which really blocks them because, I'm one person, what can I do? Whereas what you're doing here is you're not only showing people, look, collectively we can do this stuff, but we can only do it collectively if everybody plays a role. And what role do you want to play, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
100%. And we'll ask people to make an individual commitment as they leave the room, and we'll kind of take photos of that, and we follow people up on that. And some people it will just be something like, so in the first in the interview process, we'll often ask people, what's your dream? What's the most important idea out of that dream? What can we do to make that happen? Will you help? And people, or I think 90% of people we ask will always say yes, and then we say how. So they've already gone to so what we'll do is we'll do these interviews out in the community one-to-one, and then we bring everyone to a big event where there'll be hundreds of people, and they come to that event already knowing what their dream is, what specific ideas for action they want to see, and how they can contribute. And then we're bringing that together as a whole to see what does this look like collectively when we bring everyone together. So yeah, people will leave with specific commitments, and it could be like, we spoke to a lot of people from the WI who are kind of like, I can make really good cakes and I will bring them to events. Or there might be other people who say, we had someone who was a champion swimmer at our last event who said, I'm going to bring all the champion swimmers together to save the pool. We had someone who was a structural engineer. We had people from the university who had expertise in cleaning pools. So you get basically an asset map of your community at the same time of all the different ways people can contribute. Yeah.
And it was interesting. What did you say? You said something along the lines of, we ask people, how would you like to help, or how can you help, or can you help? Do you remember the exact phrase that you used?
So we say, what can we do today to make this happen? And they'll say, oh, well, you need to X, Y, Z. And then we say, and will you help us?
Okay, and I love that. So there are just a couple of things that are popping into my head here. So one is, and I'm sure there's some research out there, but I can't cite any of it just yet. But I really believe that we are giving creatures. If we want to give, it's a big part of who we are. If I ask somebody for help, almost anybody would turn around and say yes if they could, if it was within their gift to give, right? We love being asked for help. And Adam Grant has recently released a new book called Give and Take, where he talks about, and I haven't finished reading it, but he talks about this ability of humans to give, and actually just how successful we are as humans. We tend to be more successful, happier, and so on and so forth when we give. So offering that people that invitation just makes me so happy. That's just lovely. And the way you framed it is beautiful. Have you ever had anyone come back and say, well, actually, no, I don't want to be part of this? Have you had any peculiar responses?
Yeah, we've had a couple where people just say, I'm doing so many things in my life, I can't do any more right now. But I have to say, it is really the minority. Nearly everyone says yes, I will help. And for me, I've done a bit of research around building strong relationships, and I think every single relationship that we have, whether it's personal relationships or parent-child relationships or institutional relations, whatever it is, they all focus on reciprocity. And if you don't have reciprocity, it's not a strong relationship. So it always really has to be exactly that two-way give and take, and that's what makes it feel equal, important and valued. Yes, I really believe in that.
And I like that you said, what did you say? You said something like, almost every time when we ask people this question, most people come back and they say yes. And for me, at the end of a workshop, for people to actually say yes, or at the end of a session, they take that with them. They've given you some acknowledgement, not just to the commitment, but to what you've decided together, I think, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Really interesting. So you've spoken a little bit about appreciative inquiry, and of course, after I spoke to you, I sort of went and did my homework, and I came across something called the Presencing Institute, and how appreciative inquiry is often tied into harvesting and social presencing. And is this stuff that you use? Is this stuff that you're involved in? Can you tell us anything about that and whether it feeds into your work at all?
Yeah, so these are three quite different things. So social presencing, which is something I do as well, that links to the Presencing Institute. Appreciative inquiry, I think there's a centre for appreciative inquiry, so they don't tend to come together, those two. And then there's outcome harvesting, which I've started to use a lot more in my work, because it's a way of monitoring and evaluating social change retrospectively or as it happens. So it's a way of capturing emergent outcomes. So instead of most third sector projects, you have to most projects, you have to predefine, we're going to achieve X, Y, Z, and then you just focus on capturing those outcomes. Outcome harvesting allows you to look at all the different types of outcomes that are happening across the system, both good and bad, and to make sense of that information collectively. So you're co-producing the evaluation. You're not just trying to meet funders' needs. You're saying, actually, out of everything we're doing, what is most valuable to you as a community, and how should we capture that change together? So we're capturing the right information that means something to the community rather than just the funders and investors. So that's outcome harvesting. And I do use that a lot now with appreciative inquiry to capture change as we go along. Outcome harvesting is an evaluation methodology, so it's totally separate, but it comes from evaluating a program which was using appreciative inquiry for 10 years. And so I was evaluating a program that had been doing appreciative inquiry over 10 years with their community, between a public sector institution and a community, and outcomes harvesting was a really good way of capturing that change through that process. And then the social presencing and the Presencing Institute. Social presencing is a way of using mindfulness, movement, and reflection to help unstick people, to help people move forward when they're feeling stuck. So it's kind of a form of almost like coaching through movement that you can use either individually or with a group of people. And you can also use it for systems mapping, so mapping systems and seeing how you want those systems to change. So again, it links well with appreciative inquiry at the front, because when we're starting an appreciative inquiry, we'll often map the system. What does it look like now and how do we want it to shift? So it is interesting how they do all fit together, but I don't successfully use them all together very much yet because I'm still quite new to social presencing. And then social presencing also links to the Presencing Institute and Theory U, which is about codifying innovation. And the similarity between social presencing and appreciative inquiry is they open up these spaces for kind of discovery and generative thought and conversation, which is a key part of the innovation process. So yeah, those are the kind of loose links and connections, but they're not kind of generally connected, I don't think.
Presencing, social presencing, the way you described it, so this kind of meditation, movement, and so on together. For some reason, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, for some reason I'm thinking that this is an embodied approach and therefore it's multi-sensory, right? It's that prior perception. I probably have to look that up. How we consider where we stand in relation to other things, or our body in relation to other things. What we're feeling, smelling, tasting, touching, and in the work that I do, I can't say that all people who work with futures necessarily do this, but I love this idea of combining the multi-sensory to this perception of the future, in the same way that maybe with your appreciative inquiry, when you're talking to people about the past, people will sort of relive that moment, they'll smile or they'll feel very sad, as they're kind of reliving that. And I'm wondering to what extent it doesn't have to be presencing, just generally speaking, to what extent do you actively encourage people to think about their senses when they're thinking about the future vision or the future dream that they're putting together?
Yeah, our future question will usually be something like, imagine it's 10 or 20 years into the future. What do you see, feel, and hear? Yeah, so it's always, what activities are happening or what's most inspiring you. But yeah, we'll always root it in see, feel, and hear. And part of that is to get the visual as well, because we're going to pull out of all of these interviews a big visual image. So it does need to feel really tangible. So that's 100% right. And actually in the appreciative inquiry process, you're traditionally meant to kind of enact a bit of the vision as a group, and I often don't do that. But yeah, the idea of enacting the future of how you want it to be and experiencing that, I think is really powerful. I'd like to bring it in more. And I think the reason I'm interested in using embodiment, because you're exactly right, social presencing is all about embodiment. The reason I kind of am drawn to that is because if I think back, by doing appreciative inquiry on myself, which is basically what I did through all the workshops, in which I'd gone through some really transformative change and that had stuck with me, they always involved movement. And in particular, I went on a Theatre of the Oppressed kind of training in my early 20s, which was a week long and had almost no talking in it. And it was so transformative. And I can remember it in such detail. and not just, you know, the learning, but I can remember so clearly what I felt and how my feelings shifted. And that's what I really love about social presencing, is you're not just changing, okay, this is what I've got to do differently, because we all know what we've got to do differently. It's changing the feeling around it of, okay, I suddenly feel motivated to do this, or I feel this release, or whatever it is. The shift in the feeling really helps then, you know, change how we behave. And then it also sticks, because we've, like, you don't just go back to a thought, you can feel it in your body. I can remember the position I was in at which point I had this feel, you know, this feeling. So when I go to do that thing again, that will come back to me, that exact position. And I think, right, I'm not going to do that this time, I'm going to do it like that. So yeah, I think if I would really like to be brave enough to include embodiment, especially more in my appreciative inquiry work. Yeah.
Again, what I heard was that based on your personal experience, right? So this is anecdotal. You feel that this embodiment piece of a, I don't know, some sort of intervention or some sort of experience could potentially be instrumental in closing this knowledge action gap, right? Because as you say, we know what we need to do, and for whatever reason we decide not to do it, right? And so that's what I heard from that story that you told, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
This is something that's really, it's one of the reasons that I decided to create my little PhD project and pitch it, because I was really curious about how so many people we know about the environmental problems, we know about climate change, we don't need to know it in great depth, we just know that there's a problem and we need to act. And yet, and it's, of course, you throw in any other problem, right? Losing weight, getting healthy, stopping smoking, same issue, right? So really, so this is very encouraging for me to hear that you've experienced that. One of the things you told me, though, is that you've also played with using the future in your own life. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's also interesting just to see how futures isn't just something for organizations or for communities or for universities, it's something that's very relevant for us as individuals.
Yeah, it's funny, because before, I think one of the reasons that appreciative inquiry spoke to me so much when I learned it was because it really captured things that I was already doing. And one of the principles in appreciative inquiry is that images inspire action. And that really resonated with me, because I can't remember how old it was, about like 10-15 years ago, me and my partner were living in London, and my partner absolutely hated it. He was really unhappy, and we were feeling really stuck, actually, really stuck. And I kind of got a notepad and pen out, and I was just said, okay, well, what would your dream life look like? And we started, and he was kind of saying, oh, we'd live here and moved back to Wales and blah, blah, blah. And I started kind of drawing exactly what he said, and then I was adding in, yeah, and I would do this and I would do that. So we drew this picture, and within 6 months of drawing the picture, we'd already achieved half of it. So we'd moved back to Wales, we'd got kind of jobs that we exactly wanted to be doing, and so on and so forth. So we started doing this every new year for a number of years. And then so probably by about the third or fourth year, we had this really clear picture of exactly what we wanted our life to be like. And it seemed, you know, impossible. Like there was no way that would ever happen. But it was really nice that we just had this shared dream that we just had together. And that in itself was just really nice. And it was kind of these cliffs with the sea, and we'd be surfing in the sea, and we had a house, and we had 2 children and cats and chickens. And then there was like a community growing scheme nearby. There was a big dance hall. So there's a lot of very, very specific details that went across this picture. And then we didn't really think about it and got on with our lives for 5 years, maybe longer, because we had kids and it was a little bit, you know, disruptive. And then we pulled the picture out a year or 2 ago, and it is exactly to the T the life that we live now. And the level of detail and similarity is like spooky. And it's not kind of like, you know, it's not the same as in, you know, we don't live like in some farmhouse, you know, in the middle of nowhere. We live on like a 60s housing estate. which is what we can afford, you know, is within our realms of reality. But we kept chickens at the school, and we had 2 children, and where we live just happens to be, yeah, along some cliffs with a surfing beach with a forest next to it. And then I danced at the local hall, and so it all has come true to it too. And I don't think that's because we manifested it. I think it's because it guided so clearly our decision making at every step of the journey, and it aligned our dreams and visions. He wanted to live by the sea, I wanted to live by a forest, and I wanted to live by a city. And we were like, there's no way we can combine all of these things, but we did, you know. And I think it was just having that real clarity in what we wanted and what we wanted to work towards. It's still a little bit spooky. I'm like, maybe we did manifest it. Yeah.
You said something about you don't feel that it was something that you manifested. And in my head, I think that's really important, because although I believe in some way in this idea of manifestation, I believe much more in this idea about planting seeds, and you're kind of giving your brain a little, so here are some directions that we want to take. Now just spot the opportunities and take them, which I feel is more what you've described, or that's what it sounded like you aligned a bit more with that thinking. Is that right? Or
yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's very rare actually for people to just get absolute clarity on what they want from things. I think we generally just drift, like all our friends have moved here, or we need to move out of London, so we'll go to Bristol. You know, we just kind of tend to follow these like pathways which are kind of not really that well thought out. And even in a relationship, like a lot of people probably don't sit down together and think, what do we both want and how can we align that? Not saying that we're totally aligned on everything at all. But you know, on these big life decisions, we both need to equally get what we need out of our future, you know. And I don't want to be following him around, I don't want him following me around. It needs to meet both our needs. And that's exactly the same approach, you know, with communities. It's very rare that we actually all sit down and state what everyone's needs are. And actually, we don't need to get in conflict over these things, because there's a way of meeting everyone's needs collectively at the same time if we just put a little bit of thought into it and a bit of structure.
And so now that you've brought us back to the communities, so thinking about futures again just for a moment, how far into the future do you invite them to think?
Yeah, it depends on the project and on the client of who I'm working with. And so we generally do kind of 5-10 years. But one of the things that happened when I was working with Cardiff University is they made a really lovely, so Mari McVicker, who's the professor of community, she's the academic lead for Community Gateway, and she's a professor in architecture. And she persuaded the vice chancellor of the university to make this really strong commitment to the local community and a community centre that they were redeveloping together, by committing to being part of the board and kind of being heavily involved for 100 years. And that 100-year commitment really reframed a lot of things for everyone involved, actually. And it made us, like, at the time we were also working with a youth forum, and I spoke to one of the youth forum leaders, but he would have only been like 15 or 16 at the time. He's in his early 20s doing a PhD now. It's very crazy. But he suddenly had a shift of, oh, hang on, if this is going to be here for 100 years, how are we going to keep the youth forum here for 100 years? And actually, how am I going to start getting the next generation of young people ready to take this youth forum on? And they really now, they've started to think way beyond them as individuals or their roles. They think based on who are our next leaders going to be, how are we going to sustain this over hundreds of years of cycles. And it makes everything, weirdly, even though it's over a kind of bigger context, it makes, you know, the small things seem much more manageable. Things that might have got people hung up on things in if you were thinking short term of, oh, that's really hard to overcome. When you're thinking over hundreds of years, everything weirdly seems more manageable. Yeah. So yeah, so generally we'll work with people between kind of 5 to 10 years, but the 100-year scale I think is really interesting.
I'm fascinated that you work with such a mix of time frames. Many companies that I work with prefer to focus on 5, 10, 20 years, whereas when I'm running futures literacy workshops, we're thinking 75 to 100 years. And then there are some futurists who I know who like to explore 300 years into the future.
One of the things that makes that really easy in Wales is we've got the Future Generations Act. So all public sector organisations need to be thinking about their future generations, and demonstrably, so actually it opens up those conversations in a way which probably a lot of the world can't do. And that's a real luxury, to be able to think about our future generations and ourselves as ancestors. What are we leaving for the future, and how are we nurturing our future generations now to be able to take over from us, which I think is traditionally what happens in cultures where they do kind of they think much more about their ancestors and planning for the future. So yeah, it's just really nice that started to come into the mainstream in the public sector.
Yeah, and of course, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention philosopher Roman Krznarik's book, The Good Ancestor. He argues for long-term thinking every day, and it sounds like Wales is on that.
Yeah.
And the question, of course, is then how many people are taking this mandate seriously and applying it? Because as we know, it's all very well to have regulations, but it's another thing to make sure that they're implemented.
I think the act is very much built into how people operate now.
Okay.
And I think actually, if I compare some of the things that are happening in England to what's happening in Wales, there's definitely different decision-making processes. I know recently they stopped building roads and decided to invest in public transport, for example. And that would have been a future generations decision. Where they're suddenly thinking not about what's our immediate reward and win within this 5-year government cycle, but what do we actually need to prepare our future generations. So I think it'll take more time, but I definitely do feel it is different here.
That's fascinating. So I'm just wondering, do you know of any other regions or countries in the world that use this future ancestor focus?
I think Wales was the first in the world to have a policy like
wow, fantastic.
Yeah, I know, and I do really love Wales for that. And I think they're also influencing other countries. I think something, I'm not up to speed on this, but I think they're starting to influence change, and other countries are starting to adopt similar approaches. Yeah.
I love that Wales is first. That's brilliant. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the swimming pool project, right, which was a community project. What kind of organisation were you working for there?
That was as part of my local community.
All right, so this is a local community. Then you mentioned, working with the University of...
So I've worked with Cardiff University over 10 years now. And I started off there. Community Gateway program. I was the first project manager for that, and I used to do that. So I was brought in to develop a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship between Cardiff University and a ward in Wales, which is the most a ward in Cardiff, which is the most diverse area of Wales, and they didn't really have any kind of strategy or thinking around how they were going to do that. So they gave me the freedom to experiment. And I'd recently just learned about appreciative inquiry because I've been working at Teach First, and we were trying to design a whole community approach to improving educational outcomes for schools in the valleys communities where there's kind of high poverty. And so we developed this approach, and actually it also responds again to the Future Generations Act, because the Future Generations Act had as one of its kind of principles that everything needs to be co-produced between communities and public sector organisations. So everyone had, co-production was flying around everywhere in Wales of we need to co-produce this and co-produce that, but there wasn't a lot of clarity in how you actually do that. And appreciative inquiry seemed like the perfect tool to actually apply the co-production principles. And I was working with this amazing woman called Jenny O'Hara, who kind of introduced me to that, and we trained together in that. And she went off and took it into a charity that she started working for, well, she was the CEO of, and she used appreciative inquiry through the entire organisation. And then I took it to Cardiff University to experiment with, well, okay, how would this work between the public sector institution and the community? And I called the person that had trained me and said, can you do this with the whole community? And he was like, I don't really know, but you can give it a try. And yeah, we've done it a number of times since. I've done it a number of times since now for the university, and it's always been really interesting. But the other thing I would say is it's always the start of the process, because then after that, it's the bit where you're like, okay, well, we want to start collaborating with hundreds of people very quickly, like over a number of weeks. How do we start doing that? So that's the bit that I do. And then after that, there's a whole years of, then coming together and working out how you're going to collaborate and deliver all these things. So I kind of do the easy bit, really, to bringing everyone together.
It's so funny that you say that. In my head, when you were talking about this, I thought, aha, right. So really doing all of the fun stuff, the workshops, the appreciative inquiry, the future stuff. This is the fun bit. This is the easy bit. And actually, it's not easy. Let's be very honest about this, right? Getting hundreds of people on board from all sorts of different backgrounds, from different parts of society, all of whom are probably driven by slightly different things. This is hard work.
Yes.
No, for you and for them, right?
Yes, it is hard work. It is hard work, and it does take time, and it is a collective effort. Very much, it's a collective commitment to something, and people, everyone has to give quite a lot in that process. But the other thing is, going back to that reciprocity, it's very reciprocal, because you just get so much out of doing the process as well. Like, personally, it feels like the best job in the world, listening to interviews of people talking about all the many different ways they've made a difference, or all the times they felt part of the community, or whatever. It's so uplifting. But it is hard work. It's not an easy feat, and the level of outreach required is time consuming. But what's nice again about this process is you're sharing the load again. So what we would do is we'll just start by finding maybe 20 people who want to collaborate with us, who want to engage with us, and then we rely on the questions that we're asking to motivate and inspire others. So we'll train 20 people to become kind of appreciative inquiry interviewers, and then just ask them to go and speak to 3 to 5 people in their network, whether it's friends or family or whoever it is. And then we'll invite everyone who's been interviewed and all of the interviewers to come together and kind of take action together then. So it is it's a hard process, but it's also kind of an effective process for rallying lots of people quite quickly.
So what I'm hearing there is that this is not just about you working with the university or the community or whatever it happens to be, putting together this program and then coming in and delivering everything yourself, obviously because it's co-created, you've got the community involved, but you're also capacity building, right? You're building these skills and people so that they can take that further out, like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
All right, and of course that's very helpful, because I know that a couple of weeks ago you ran a workshop with Anne in Kune, is that correct?
Yeah, Anne McCune.
So you ran a workshop with her recently using primarily appreciative inquiry, is that correct? And using this project that you've just finished with the swimming pool, was that one of the examples that you were giving?
Yes, so we were running appreciative inquiry training, and I tend to use it with whole communities, and Anne tends to use it with teams. So we were talking about how we use it in different contexts. And it was a really fantastic workshop to explore with other facilitators what are all the different ways we can apply this, what are the principles that we want to adhere to, and why are they of meaning, I guess, to us as a group. And then we did a rapid appreciative inquiry all together, where we kind of thought about what's our vision for what type of appreciative inquiry facilitators we want to be. It's a bit meta, but yeah, it was really interesting workshop.
Okay, so there are kind of three spokes to your wheel. That's not correct, but I'm going to use it anyway for the time being. So one is planning these events, I guess. The second is capacity building within communities. And then the third is capacity building or training, coaching, education outside of communities, potentially for fellow practitioners or aspiring practitioners. Is that about right?
So I'll also consult individually. So sometimes people will do this in their own community and like have kind of broad idea of the process, and then I'll consult with them, or I can do one-to-one training as well.
And do you work with businesses as well?
I tend to work with the third sector and public sector, and I'll use it a lot with teams. I use it in all aspects of my life. So I use it in parenting, I use it in relationship, but on team days and things like that, I'll often use elements of appreciative inquiry. Or if there's like strategic planning, we'll do appreciative inquiry. I use it all the time because at its core, it motivates and inspires people around a shared goal. And so everyone kind of wants that in some form. You know, they want to be working together, inspired and kind of self-organizing around whatever interests and passions they have. So that's what it does for me, why I find it helpful.
Right, and so the reason I initially learned about your work was because I saw something that you had written about your community project, and that involved futures or dreaming. And yet, what I'm taking away from this conversation is about so much more than scenario planning or creating a collective possible future. What I'm hearing is that what really underpins your work, the thread that runs through it all, and indeed through aspects of your life, is appreciative inquiry.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I spoke about Mary McVicker earlier, who's a professor. When I spoke to her about it, she says, "Oh, appreciative inquiry is a philosophy," and I think, "Oh no, it's a method." But it is both. It's a philosophy and a method, and it is definitely a philosophy which I live my life around. And actually, we started. So I introduced this idea of appreciative inquiry at a very small scale in the Welsh School of Architecture, where I was just kind of playing around. Could we use it to link up academics and researchers with local community members around shared interests and passions? And actually, it's really become absorbed in the whole of the Welsh School of Architecture, and hundreds of students have now been trained in it, and they now go off and use that in architectural practice. And I guess a lot of that is probably the philosophy rather than the method. And yeah, I think for me, it is very ingrained in my approach to life now. Yeah.
Fascinating. And it just, again, this word that keeps popping up with everything that you've spoken about and the work that you're doing, I just see ripples, right? You are a pond, and from you, these tiny little ripples emanate, which is a wonderful, wonderful way for somebody to think about you. So there we go. So I'm curious, anybody who wants to work with you is probably best off booking a short call with you just to kind of work out how you could potentially work together.
Yeah, or probably more likely LinkedIn. I generally work through word of mouth. So yeah, LinkedIn would be great.
Perfect. And of course, LinkedIn information, contact information, and so on, those will all be in the show notes so that people will be able to get a hold of you. And Rosie, who are you inspired to work with or to help?
I'm just inspired by people coming together around things they're passionate about. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter what the topic is, because I think the thing that is so important in this day and age is just people coming together and connecting and realizing that they actually have the power to affect change. Yeah, so I mainly work with the third sector and public sector who are interested in co-production and equitable service provision. And yet that manifests in lots of different ways around lots of different topics and ideas and whatever inspires the community at that moment in time.
Would you classify yourself primarily as a facilitator? Because that's what I'm hearing. When I think about facilitators, I'm thinking about somebody who makes processes easier, but who isn't coming in as the subject matter expert to say, "Oh, I'm a consultant, you do X, Y, and Z." Is that what you do?
Yeah, I generally call myself a facilitator.
Okay. And then, of course, in that role, not being the subject matter expert is critical.
Yes, that's one of the benefits of being a facilitator.
Okay, super, wonderful. Okay, and so I think we're sort of slowly drawing to a close. One of the things I'm wondering is, are there any other things that pop into your head about connecting the work that you do with futures, with visioning, with whatever you want to call it, this idea about what did you call it, dreaming, right? Creating that collective dream. Is there anything that we haven't really spoken about that you think is worthwhile raising?
I just think the power of dreaming, it is so important from so many different perspectives, because it stretches what we believe to be possible. It can unite us, and it can also demonstrate that we've been heard, and that's very empowering, I think, for whether it's individuals, organizations, or communities. Just think that's a really empowering thing.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of this feeling that I'm not being listened to, right? So that having that and seeing that reflected, as you said, you draw this. Did you say you draw it? You visualize this dream, and one of the things people do is they go and have a look to see have they heard me? Has it been captured here? Interesting, fascinating. And anything else that you wanted to cover but we didn't get to because I kept on interrupting you and taking you into new directions that interested me?
There's so much I could say. I think in the thing that kind of I haven't articulated is that in the current climate and in the world that we're in now, in a world of kind of tech and lots of scenarios where we're kind of isolated and divided and kind of quite fearful, I think community work and this type of work can sometimes feel kind of fluffy. And not important in to invest in, but actually it really feels like it's at the core. It's a core solution in how we bring back power and voice and equality to communities at a really turbulent time in the world. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, agency, co-creation, creating something better for everyone, right? So what a good note to end on. My lovely Rosie, I'm so grateful that you took the time to come and have a chat to me, and that you did so with so much laughter, which just makes the whole process much better, right? So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for talking to me and finding an interest in it, and for such a lovely conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Futuring Is. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you feel inspired to do some future dreaming of your own. If you want to hear more from thinkers, dreamers, and doers who are reshaping our world for the better by using the future as a lens, you can subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcasting tool, or subscribe to the Futuring Is newsletter at www.futuringis.com, and I'll send you a personal note to tell you when new episodes appear. Last but not least, if you're a thinker, dreamer, or doer who is reshaping our world for the better using the future as a lens, or if you know someone who fits that description, please get in touch. Perhaps you'd be the perfect guest for the next podcast. And that's it for today. Until we meet again, I hope that you go well, stay well, and find time to plant seeds that grow into hopeful, sustainable futures.